Good morning and welcome to today's Diversity and Inclusion webinar, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Implications for Managing Diverse Teams. Thanks to many of you who are typing into our chat box. See people from Seattle, from the UK, from Omaha, Nebraska, from all over. We have a really great group of participants, a big group joining us today from Dallas, and a really excellent presenter to share with you this morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Amy Allen, and I'm the Senior Program Manager for the National Apartment Association's Education Institute. And I am so thrilled to be able to offer you today the second in our series of diversity and inclusion webinars. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple housekeeping points. This presentation is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Diversity and Inclusion Resources page of the NAA website. So you'll be able to refer to the recording afterward. We'll also post any resources mentioned during the broadcast on that page as well. So any links or things that are referenced can be found there later. There are both a chat box and a Q&A box on your screen. Feel free to use either of those if you have a question or comment. I will be moderating those and we'll share them with the presenter for the Q&A session at the end of toward the end of the hour. We'll save the last 10 to 15 minutes for question and answer, but feel free to type questions into that box at that time. And now I'd like to introduce Rita Cepeda. She is the Regional Director for PRG Real Estate, and she will be introducing today's presenter. Rita?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bob Crouch. Dr. Crouch is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office for the Institutional Equity at Duke University and Duke University Healthcare System. He currently works with a variety of employees and students across the Duke community related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. He provides consultation, training, education, and coaching to various constituents in leadership, management, and other positions with enhancing and developing strategies and goals aligned with their respective entities' missions and overall vision for diversity, equity, and inclusion for the larger Duke community. Before coming to Duke, Dr. Crouch worked for more than 16 years training staff and writing curriculum through the Staff Development Office at the North Carolina Justice Academy, currently under the Department of Public Safety. He also served as an adjunct professor for North Carolina Central University and Mount Olive University, where he taught criminal justice and management courses. Dr. Crouch holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration from Fayetteville University, a Master of Public Administration degree from North Carolina Central University, and a doctorate in education from Gardner-Webb University. He has done graduate work in public policy at North Carolina State University. His experience in diversity and inclusion training, coaching, and human resources spans over 25 years. He is a key resource for Duke and the Durham community, where Dr. Crouch, we thank you for participating on this webinar series. Please feel free to start sharing your knowledge with us.
There. Okay. Well, good morning to everyone, and thank you, Rita, for that very kind introduction. I want to get started in a couple of things. One of the things that I want to share a short video, and it would be remiss of me, and I think, not practical, unless we are aware and acknowledge our current climate. And that's certainly with COVID, as well as the protests around racial injustice. So I want to share a short video just to kind of address this, because, as I said, we can't divorce these things from what we're doing, because it's impacting the workplace. Whether you're working from home or whether you are a frontline worker or an essential worker, regardless of, or if you're thinking about kids going back to school, we're all impacted by the current climate. So let me pause right here. I'm going to start the video, and afterwards, if you have any thoughts, I'm going to, I think it was mentioned, of course, that you'll put them in the chat box or in a questionnaire, because I will check periodically to to see your responses or questions, as well as was shared, that at the end, we want to leave time for that to address any particular questions. So here we go. Let's see if we can watch our video, and we'll continue after then.
It's not fair when the people have to experience this when I never have. I mean, look at me. I'm a lighter complexion.
So, what is white privilege?
White privilege is advantage that I got from being born white in a culture that favors whites.
Dr. Peggy McIntosh popularized the phrase white privilege more than 3 decades ago. She's an author, a scholar, and says it doesn't matter if you were born rich or not. White people in this country have an advantage. In a 1989 essay, she listed 46 ways being white has helped her.
Some of my examples were, if the cops pull me over, I can be sure it's not because of my skin color. I can go shopping alone, pretty well assured that I won't be harassed or followed. If I need medical help or legal help, my race won't work against me. White privilege is mostly a matter of lack of awareness of the big system within which lighter people worldwide have been advantaged.
And when talking about that system, she's talking about systemic racism. So what is systemic racism? Temple University's Dr. Malefi Asante, a leading figure in African-American studies, says it's
the enactment of policies to punish a group or to oppress a group or to suppress a group, whether it's redlining various districts, keeping people from getting loans or getting houses, or whether it is suppression of voting.
And scholars say systemic racism is one of the factors that can contribute to unconscious or implicit bias, another term we've been hearing a lot lately. So what is implicit bias?
What it means is that people who are biased often assume that what they are doing is natural, that it is not based on racism. A person may assume that the black person who is arrested by the police must have been doing something wrong. There must have been something, you know, and in fact, many times there is nothing except the color of the person.
Both professors say the fact that the nation is starting to really talk about these terms and many others is a positive step forward. In Center City, Erin Coleman, NBC 10 News.
Okay, so we're going to get back to where we are. Okay. You know, one of the things, as I said, I wanted to touch on this, but I want to leave you with a couple of things to think about, and you may respond in the chat box or later on. But there are two things that I want to bring out when I want you to think about what's different about this time. You know, some are old enough to remember Rodney King or Trayvon or the other instances, but we've really seen with the George Floyd incident, and of course that shortly after we saw Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, but what those things that are different now. Let me give you just a couple examples. We've seen this not last just for a week or two, but folks are still protesting. You don't only see African Americans or people of color out there, but you see whites and everyone from across the country to across the world. The other point I want to just kind of plant this seed to think about, how do I use my privilege to support marginalized groups, whether African American, Latino American, Latinx and others. So think about, what's different about now. Some people say there's a better understanding, there's a new awakening, but also what makes it different? One story I'll tell real quick, I tell everyone, is that a young African American mother in one of my sessions said, I got a 13-year-old and he's 6'3". So what did that mean? Some have heard about, the talk. But again, I wanted to kind of plant those things, certainly what is different. And secondly, how do I use my privilege? Now, there's not just white privilege, there's There's male privilege, there's heterosexual privilege. Whenever you're in a position, it does not mean having wealth necessarily, but how do I use it to stand up for others? Okay, let's dive right into it. I always like to set what I call kind of session norms or learning community guidelines. Just going to briefly go through them because we want folks to participate. And I know the vehicle for that now is the chat box. And so hopefully you'll use that. And so when you speak up, we always say, tell or speak your own truth, based on you, on I or my. Some folks like to speak up for others when they really only represent themselves. So we want to listen to other people's truths. We also want to have more of a dialogue as best we can, because in a dialogue, everybody's perspective is listened to, it's understood and appreciated. But a debate is when somebody's trying to win. Nobody's trying to win here. We're just trying to learn and benefit from each other's experiences, knowledge, and skills. And also we want to take risk and work from our edge. I always say it takes courage to act in hope. So in other words, sometimes we have to kind of step out there. I've been doing this work, somewhere around 30 years. And one of the things I always say is that sometimes we have to become a little more comfortable with the uncomfortable and to make progress. I think of just the recent passing of John Lewis. He said that sometimes you got to get in the way, sometimes you got to give some good trouble. Now, I'm not trying to start anything, but I want to give you something to think about. Certainly in this, we want to respect time and enjoy the journey, because this is not a subject, whether we're talking, especially in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we don't arrive one day and think that we're there. We're continually learning in our life experiences and from each other. And remember, this begins with me, because only I can examine Bob and change Bob. I want to ask, and since we didn't divvy up the group, I'm just going to ask you to choose one of these questions and kind of see how you respond. Later on, we'll look in the chat box or maybe open up for more verbal conversation. But one, I want you to think about, what is the value gained from having a diverse workforce at NAA, okay? What is the advantage of having that diversity? And the second question says, what are some of the challenges that we want to have in having a diverse workforce? What are those, as I said, what are those challenges that we face? So remember, and I'll cap it with this right now. When we think about the value, we're thinking about the business case. And we'll talk later on as we kind of summarize some of the points around this. And then when we talk about facing and dealing with the challenges, we're talking about how do we manage diversity. So I won't belabor it now, but if you have thoughts about that, why it's important or valued, and what do we need to do in the challenges that we face when we talk about diversity and inclusion, equity. Okay, let's dive right into it. When I think about what is diversity, now this is a term that has been used, a lot. Okay, let me say. And so early on in my doing this work and in the history of this work, when we said diversity, people thought about what you look like. Am I Black? Am I Latinx? Am I white? Am I male? Am I female? But, in other words, those physical things. But diversity literally means difference. If you look it up in Merriam-Webster, that's what you'd see. So let me just share with you, and if you look around my illustration here, you'll see that there are many things, such as culture or personality or values that you can't just look at and see physically. So I want to divide it into three categories or dimensions that capture it. One is human diversity, dealing with those things about myself that I feel are permanent and I cannot change. I often introduce myself as an African-American male boomer, and so I may say Black man. I'm from the James Brown era, for those old enough to know James Brown, right? Okay, but when I say I'm African-American, a male boomer, I'm telling you, first of all, my race or ethnicity. I'm telling you that I'm a male, and I'm giving you a general idea of my age by saying I'm a boomer. Now think about how it makes you feel when someone directs something derogatory or disrespectful towards you about a trait that you have that you cannot that you can't change, you feel is permanent about you. Now, in a more physical setting, I might look at a woman and say, "You woman," or something. And of course, but what I'm getting the point is that it's offensive. First of all, it might surprise you, okay? Then it's going to likely offend you, okay? And then it's going to make you mad as heck, okay? It's going to produce those things. So those things about myself, I feel, that's human diversity dealing with people. Cultural diversity, the great catch-all, deals with what's important to me. And I always like to give this kind of analogy. I say that man and woman have rocked across the globe since the beginning of time based on what is important to them. And I challenge folks to say, well, what about that? Or what? I said, well, look, if you want to read a history book, if you want to read the Torah, the Quran, or the Bible, I think it will substantiate that our conflicts and other things that we've, from the beginning of time in history, have been about, this is important to me. This is what I value. And it may be different, and oftentimes it causes conflict. Thirdly, so human diversity dealing with people, cultural diversity dealing with our environment and culture, and then there's system or process diversity. This deals with how I like to get my work done. And I like to give little parables or stories about this, and I'll give you this one. I work at Duke, and certainly most folk know we're rivals with Carolina. I often ask folk at Duke, I'll say, well, look, what if somebody from Carolina comes over here? They have the same title, they work in the same name of the same department that you do. Do you feel that they would do things the exact same way? And of course, folks will say, well, of course not. But the point I want to make is this. It doesn't mean that one's bad, one's worse, one's good, bad, or that kind of thing. It simply means that it's different. And so when we talk about difference, and we'll talk about respect in just a moment, sometimes respect has to be negotiated. Because you want to go to McDonald's and I want to go to Hardee's. We got a half hour for lunch and we've been haggling for the last 10 minutes. So again, we have to negotiate. And those are those dimensions, human, cultural, and system or process diversity. I want to say this, I won't read this verbatim, but just tell you when we talk about an inclusive environment, I think the term itself really highlights, gives you an idea, but this is the way I like to define it, to say what this is. Anytime that I have choices to make, I have decisions to make, I may have an opportunity to give. Am I being inclusive? In other words, if I've got let's say a job opening, do I only post it in this room for this group? Now, someone might say, well, yeah, it's only for this group. Well, that may be the case in certain situations, but usually we want to cast that announcement, that posting far and wide so that everyone that should have an opportunity and privy to that job will get it. As a colleague of mine often says, we need to cast a broader net. So that inclusion says, in an inclusive organization, people perceive that they are valued because of, not in spite of, their differences. So when we think about inclusion, we're, not selective inclusion. Sometimes we select, this group over here and think we're just normal, we're great, we're wonderful, and we're totally excluding the other. But are we being inclusive? Let me pause just for a moment. Read anything coming in or any observations?
Yes, we have a few observations regarding the first slides versus value. A few items, Heather Jackson said, the value gain of having a diverse workforce is to see different perspectives and gain insight into different ideas that overall enhance the company culture. And it is important to understand and resolve and welcome different perspectives, which is what you were mentioning.
Okay, outstanding, great, that's great, okay. Now, what I'm going to do now, and you may jot this down someplace, but I always ask, what does respect look like to you? And before I just plop this up here, I want to say now, respect can be different for different people. And if as folks can see me, in certain parts of the world, if I had a thumbs up, you say, well, you go, man, that's a good thing. But in certain parts of the world, that may be derogatory. That may be offensive, okay? So respect does not look the same to everyone. And again, as I was saying, it doesn't mean that one's right, one's wrong, better or worse. But sometimes when we have different perspectives, different places, we have to come together and negotiate. How do we move forward collaboratively, productively, and working together? So let me give a couple of my definition of respect. One is one I'm sure that many would immediately go to and say, it's the golden rule, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, my retort, or sometimes when folks say that, I certainly agree with it, and I was reared on that saying. But I also often say, you know, everybody doesn't want it done unto them the way you want it done unto you. Hence, we have what we call the platinum rule. Some may be familiar with this rule, but it simply says, do unto others as they would have done unto them. And so in essence, what we're saying here, that it's kind of like the one size does not, fit all. If you are, you've got, we were talking about our kids earlier, if you've got a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old, you love them the same, you respect them the same, and you provide for them, but they will need different kinds of things. I often use it in a professional setting. You're an engineer and, someone else is another kind of technician. We both need professional development. We both need those opportunities. They won't look exactly the same, but both are deserving of those things. So I hope we kind of grasp those concepts. I want to now share a model of workplace respect. I've used it for a number of years, and I'll say a couple of things about it. And again, after this, I'll pause for a moment to see your take on things. And so this model represents whenever we're interacting with one another, verbally, and the designations and names that we identify for one another. And so first I say word choice. I mentioned before word choice. So when you address me, you can address me as Dr. Crouch, or you can address me as Bob, but don't address me as boy, because you know the historical significance of that, especially for African-American males. And word choice deals with things you may have had your own experience. They may have called you girl or gal. They may have said you people. You may have, you can certainly, some can maybe jot down a couple, but it's important that those words, choice, and way we address one another are respectful. The next is what we say is tone. And I always say it, and if I yell a little bit, understand, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And so tone deals with those things like, am I yelling at you? Okay. Am I being sarcastic? Am I being condescending or talking down to you? That's the kind of inflections and things that we talk about tone in our voice. The other is body language. You know what I mean. Body language, talk to the hand, turn away, be distracted. Those kind of physicalities that we're doing, if we're having a conversation, then I should be paying attention. But body language, smacking our lips and rolling our eyes, all of these kinds of things are body language, which really distract or demonstrate that maybe we're not really respecting what you got to say or this conversation that we're having. And the fourth is what I call interpersonal decisions. And this really involves, how do I just, in my day-to-day decisions and interactions, how do I exclude people, Do I employ what I call that selective kind of inclusion? One example I'll give, some years ago, I had a group of doctors, and all were male except for one woman. And the lead doctor was male. He would go and he would address each of the men as Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so, and got to the woman and said, Rita, okay. But of course, all had the same credentials, but you see the exclusion there. I did not acknowledge the woman for that. Let me give you a more practical kind of thing too that may have happened to folks before. I'm in my office one day and a group of my colleagues go to lunch, and who you go to lunch with is your own business. I carry mine in a little blue bag. But while they were at lunch, they talked about a project that we were all involved in and had different responsibilities for. Cool. So what happens a couple of days later, somebody comes by my office and says, hey, Bob, you're ready to do so-and-so, and you're going to got part B. And I'm wondering, looking at it, so what the heck are you talking about? But the point I want to make is that, yes, they made a decision about that, but they made it at lunch. I was not at lunch. Now, somebody probably said, well, Bob is always with, how did he miss that? What is going on? But I want to drive home this point here. It is not the intent, it is the impact. So if that kind of thing happens, it is incumbent upon not just the leader manager, but members of the group to make sure that all are included and all have time to prepare with that. So those are just examples. Now let me tell you, we do these things and we see them through certain lenses. One is through relationship. Have I known you 10 days or 10 years? Do I report to you? Do you report to me? Are you a client? Are you a customer? These are what we mean by relationships. And certainly our relationships impact how we show up and how we interact with one another. The next is the situation. And the situation simply means that old adage, that is, there's a time and a place for everything, okay? And we certainly want to select, we don't want to have a personal, professional, maybe around my job performance or something, out in the hallway or in the lobby, everybody else is listening. But there's a time, I encourage one-on-one in a non-threatening way, go to the office or whatever. But the setting and situations are so important when we have certain discussions. Excuse me. Lastly, there is the self, and that's just who I am, okay? What makes up Bob? My experiences, my background, my records. I even give an example oftentimes in live classes where I said, I was rushing to get here, and on the way here, somebody slammed on brakes, and everything in my back seat is now in my front seat. Now, how do you think that impacted me when I walked in and got ready and tried to rush in to do my presentation or to talk with my class? So again, those kinds of things. But I often ask the question, and I want you to think about, have we used this model or parts of it, at some time or another? The normal response is, of course I do. Of course we've used it. And I say, yeah, because my parents and my community, they taught, that's how, yes, of course. The point I want to drive home with this model, though, is this. Are there times and situations where I want to be very particular, specific, and even methodical in using this, okay? If I'm sitting at home watching a game with my brother, my word choice doesn't make any difference. But if I'm in a professional setting, if I'm talking to a customer, to a client, or even my colleague, on a serious nature, that's why, when we have relationship, the familiarity certainly makes a difference. So the point I want to drive home with this illustration is that, there are times and relationships where I want to be, as I said, using this professional, not joking, not yelling, not anything, but very thoughtful and professional in using this. And I'm sure we can all think of some situations where we are all responsible for doing that. Let me see where we are here. Let me pause for a moment just to see, do we have any comments or questions based on any of the things I've covered so far?
Yes, a few comments to share. It's not about the intent, it's about the impact. So you mentioned that. And there were a few comments about respect and what that means for them. So asking and not assuming, being fully present, and respect for someone means equals humanity and decency towards one another.
Okay, I love that. One of the things when I'm having, I do pieces around racial justice and other kinds of topics, I ask folks, I say, well, let's meet at our humanity, okay? So I love that response that they had given. Thank you. Okay, I want to look at now, and I'm going to pause right here. So what is unconscious bias? Many are familiar with unconscious bias, implicit bias, subtle bias, but let me give mine, and you can certainly read about attitude stereotypes, because we know that these kinds of things, contribute, our beliefs and, to our biases. But this is the way I describe it. I say these are those things that operate beneath the threshold of my consciousness, out of my awareness, but yet and still they can impact my actions, behaviors, what I do and say. And so, as I said, we're unaware of it. You know, you've heard the term some microaggressions. Here, these are subtle kinds of, behaviors that crop up. At the first, if someone directs something towards you like that, you might say, oh, okay, well, okay, all right. But then if it happens frequently, so, whoa, wait a minute, because it can really impact one's performance, not to mention their self-esteem. An example will be, there's a gentleman called Daryl Wing Sue up at, I think he's at Columbia now, wrote a book called Everyday Microaggressions. And I tie this in because microaggressions, unconscious biases, can be unconscious. You're not aware of that you're doing it, directing something derogatory. One example is Dr. Sue is Asian, is of Asian ancestry or descent. But he's been, he's like 4th, 5th generation, American. But folks are always asking, well, where are you from? And he'll say, well, I'm from Portland. No, where are you really from? I'm from Portland, Oregon. Usually after they ask a couple of times or 3, they understand that, yeah, I'm an American. This is where I'm from. Another quick one is that oftentimes I find that women, sometimes people of color, those in lesser, power, someone will ask a question, and even though I had an example where I raised my hand and I knew I gave the right answer, it was accurate, and the director said, well, yeah, that's all right, Bob. Then someone else says it that's different than me, almost exactly the same thing, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. And so the point I'm trying to make is that oftentimes what we look like, who we are, and sometimes, in our conscious or less than conscious awareness, we are not listening and ignore folks sometimes of different groups. Let me move ahead and I want to share a short video, and then we'll come back and say a couple more things about this.
Are you seriously considering her as a candidate?
Just don't trust her.
She's a woman.
She's a woman.
This is a man's job.
She's clearly not educated.
Really not. Does she even speak English?
That's not me. I'm not like that. You call it an honest mistake. Science calls it a blind spot. Our unconscious mind is a mysterious and powerful thing. It makes 90% of our decisions without us even knowing it. Our brains are overloaded with 11 million pieces of information every second. Yet we can only process about 40 of them. So we're wired to make cognitive shortcuts, using past experiences to make assumptions. And you know what happens when we assume. Our unconscious mind can put us on autopilot, determining where we sit, who we eat lunch with, who we turn to for advice, and who we choose to offer a helping hand. Living our lives with blind spots can put us in a tunnel. Same point of view, same decisions, same outcomes. We can find ourselves trapped in the land of snap judgments and misconceptions. We've all been on both the giving and receiving end of blind spots. Think about it. Who's talented? Who's able? Who can I trust? Who belongs? We've all been there. Blind spots are part of the human condition. Our choices have consequences for us and the people we interact with. By accepting that blind spots exist, we can stop. Imagine what possibilities exist if we could do it all over again. Different perspectives, inclusive relationships, diverse networks, better outcomes, seeing people for who they really are. People like you, with unlimited potential. We all have blind spots. Once you accept that you have them, you can choose to do something about it. It's time to check your blind spots and focus on what's possible.
Okay. Want to move on. I'm going to pause after I do this next little exercise and kind of get your thinking. I want to show you, I want to move this along, and so I know you'll have to respond, in your chat box or whatever, but I'm going to show you several pictures. And in those pictures, I want you to, tell me, and I call these first impressions. Your first impressions, what is their gender, their race, maybe their cultural background, just by taking a quick, a few seconds glimpse at the picture. What do you think they do for a living? Their occupation. What are they actually doing in the photograph? Just your immediate gut feeling, when you see this person. What do you think they do? Who are they? Just in your initial, gut feeling. So here we go. And again, I'm going to only show the pictures for a few seconds. And then, but at the end, I will identify each one. But after each one, if you have a chance, just say, well, I think they're this or they're that, and this is what they do. So let's give this a shot. Here we go. Okay. I was going to say, take just a moment. I'm going to show the next in just a second.
Your first impressions, Bob, that you've seen from the first picture is musician, businesswoman, comedian, teacher, professor, female teacher. I feel like I can trust them.
Oh, wow, you guys are good. I mean by that, you're quickly. I was trying to let me get to the next one. Those are great. Let me get to the next one. Here we go. I'm going to give it just a few seconds and we'll go from there.
Artist, counselor, advocate, artist, creative, barista, fashion designer, artist, strong, athlete.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Okay, got one more. Here we go. And then I'll come back and let me make sure I'm keep you myself. You guys are quicker than I am, you're really getting this. Okay, here we go. One more.
Professor, writer, professor, historian, professor, doctor, therapist, writer, retired.
Okay, great, outstanding. Let me go back and give you just a brief description. I don't have my narrative here. This is, his name is Roslav, but this person, first of all, they're transgender, okay? The other is that he started Sirius Radio. Rothplatt is the name. Started Sirius Radio, and he's the head of one of the largest pharmaceutical entities. I can't remember exactly which one, but I think one of his phrases is says, "I don't know if what I achieved is one way to, is exceptional in one way, but because I used to be a woman." In other words, comparing the genders. The next one, this lady here, and forgive me, I don't have my notes right. I can tell you her background. She is an architect, okay? She is formerly at MIT, at Brown, at Duke, and at Howard University in a number of other capacities, but that's who she is. And then Robin Williams, okay, everybody says this guy. This is a serial killer, has killed over 250 people, okay? And so those are, the reason and before I get to this next slide, I talk about these first impressions is because it's part of our natural DNA, born of our primitive reptilian cells, in ancient or prehistoric times, we're walking through the wilderness, and I got to figure out, is this fight or flight? Are you friend or foe? So we still have some of that cautionary kind of thinking, and reaction to folks. But oftentimes, I like to say that now we're in a civil we're more civil now, in a civilization, and so we don't have to make those kinds of assumptions. There are better ways to do that. But again, highlighting, just as you did a great job in responding, thank you, that that we react to folks, based on our history, our records, and some of our unconscious biases, oftentimes, as we identify folks. So I always say between stimulus and response is choice, and so we want to use that when we are dealing and getting familiar with people. I'm going to show, this is going to be about 4 minutes or so, but I want to share just a little bit, just being conscious of time, of this particular video. Stay with me.
Welcome to Talent on Tap. I'm Brendan Brown. I lead recruiting at LinkedIn, coming to you from Dallas, Texas at Talent Connect 2019. And I am thrilled to welcome Uzo Akatobi to the show. Welcome, Uzo.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself to me. Tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you work, and we'll dive in.
Yeah, so I'm the Vice President of HR, Inclusion and Diversity, and Learning and Development for Prologis.
Yeah.
Our CEO, Hamid Moghadam, he's a visionary. We are incredibly successful organization, but no organization is successful without its people.
Yeah.
We know the world is changing. Hamid recognized that as well, and through the efforts of our employees and Hamid's vision, he made inclusion and diversity one of our 5 drivers of business performance.
That's excellent.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
What that means is that our success as an organization is driven by inclusion and diversity.
You've got a leader, a
Yes.
senior leader who wants there to be change, which is, you can't ask for anything more than that just
Yes.
from the start. But what are the initial things someone in any position of leadership, whether it's someone on the ground as an individual who wants to make a difference, what they should be thinking about, how they should be preparing, educating, learning about how to be participatory in a change that you're setting out to make?
I would argue that it starts with the culture that you want, starts with the leadership that you have. You can want diversity all day, but once you get that diverse talent, what do you do with it? Mm-hmm. We're all different as human beings, and I think it's very important as leaders to understand the people that work for them, not just my name and my job title and what my function is, but what is going on in my life. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What gets me excited? I always tell my leaders that the one-on-one meeting, your one-on-one meeting with your employees, is the most powerful tool you have to really augment your team.
Let's get to your analogy, because I think we can probably talk about that one for a while.
When I talk to my leaders, I talk about, everyone wants diversity, right?
Yeah.
But do you know what to do with the diverse talent you have? The analogy that I use is, think about the X-Men, right? Arguably the most diverse team. They come from all kinds of continents and countries, and they gain these superpowers and trauma in their lives and all these different things. But if you were managing the X-Men, right? Like, your team is literally the X-Men, and you say, well, I recognize that. I recognize all the diversity you have, but at company ABC, we punch and kick. That's all we do. We don't fly. We don't do anything. So you have Wolverine, who has indestructible claws, right? It could do all kinds of amazing things. And you tell Wolverine says, I have these claws. These are my strengths. This is what I do. I get angry sometimes, and all that. It's like, hey, I appreciate your diversity, Wolverine, but we punch and kick here, so put your claws away. Storm's like, I can fly, I can change the weather, I can do all these things. I see you have superpowers. We don't need that here, right? And then over time, if Wolverine says, I'm going to go leave, I'm going to go to DC Comics or whatever, because they let me slash and do all those kind of things. I think it comes back to that lack of understanding of who's working for you, right? If you don't have one-on-ones, and you're not only using those one-on-ones, but utilizing that time in a way where you can understand the human that's working for you, you're going to miss opportunities to understand what Wolverine wants to do. If you're giving Wolverine a project, oftentimes in the comic books, it's not all the X-Men going out, it's these ones. It's a small group of them. Think about that as a project team, right? And you're putting the right people with the right strengths and the right superpowers on that thing together to go attack that problem.
And let's talk about intention. We were chatting about that earlier as well, and I was sharing.
Be aware of time. I know this is going to be made privy to you, but again, I just thought there were some good points, and I love the X-Men analogy and the kinds of things. But I want to take just a couple of minutes and review just some of the themes. One of the things we talked about, and I want to cover these because I want to leave just the last 5 minutes or so for other comments and information. So I want to go over a couple things here just quickly, and then just kind of open it up. Tips for formation of a search or hiring committees. The search and hiring staff should be done so with an eye toward diversity. I think that's said in the video. I won't expound much on that. During the forming of the committee, you should have a recruitment process that is sensitive to the formal recruiting process, but also the informal. Sometimes people get boxed in a certain description, and we don't realize that there may be others who have the same competencies. So we want to make sure that we look at the formal kinds of requirements, but also are there, areas or potential candidates that may not fit exactly in the box, but yet and still may have the competencies to satisfy the position. We want to reduce the risk of bias and consider diverse search hiring committees. And of course, we talked about what implicit bias is, and I've kind of foregone one of the little exercises. You can see it, later on. But again, am I just hiring someone because he looks like my son, or he looks like somebody was, in my church? Or do I really search myself and see, are my biases kicking in here, or am I really making a objective? That's why it's so important to examine oneself. The committee chairs should be aware of how unconscious bias can negatively impact this process. Hiring managers, needless to say, when we think about a fair and equitable hiring, we need to be familiar with the EEO and affirmative action rules, laws, knowing one's rights and responsibilities as well in HR. And lastly, committee leaders and members should consider the knowledge of diversity and inclusion as an essential part, not an add-on. I've been doing this a lot of years, and folks say, well, diversity is over here and, everything else is here. This is business. Nah. More and more, we're realizing, whether it's the literature or the research or actual companies, Fortune 500 companies, realizing that how important diversity is their success. Just in closing, I want to, and then leave a few, I want to make sure I'm leaving. Okay, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I think I got a few minutes left. Yeah, I was getting a little anxious there. So well, let me just cover these so I'll make sure I touched on them. And then, of course, I think they'll provide these. This says, how can managers promote diversity and inclusion? Lead employees by example. It's always important to be a model. People sometimes may not do all of what you say, but what you do, okay? We want to create a welcoming, inclusive environment which is conducive to our business. And so welcoming and where people feel that they belong, okay? Not because it has to do with any kind of quotas or anything like that, but they actually belong here. You ever, I use analogies. I've been invited, somebody invited you to the party because they told you needed one of every flavor, okay? But when you get to the party, does anybody ask you to dance? Okay, and what I mean by that makes me feel as though I belong. Do I have a place at the table because somebody says, well, we got to have one of these here at the table? Or do I have a place at the table because I have a voice and I am valued for the contribution, skills, and knowledge that I bring to the group? Incorporate diversity in policies, strategic plans, operational programs. And it's so important. I work with a number of departments and groups in and around Duke and other areas really on strategic plans. And in recent years, we've incorporated the diversity advantages in our strategic plan, okay? I mentioned earlier how sometimes people think, well, diversity's over here, that's nice, that's cute, but then, here's the business here. Well, we don't understand that our customers, our employees, who we work with, the people are diverse, okay? Practice regular, effective and open communication, empowerment employees. This kind of requires trust, of course, and this was kind of alluded to in the earlier video when with the Wolverine and the X-Men analogy. But that regular, effective, and open communication, because that demonstrates that I am valued. Sometimes we can have to come out and actually exchange and have interaction. Demonstrate executive commitment to diversity on an ongoing and regular basis. And so that executive commitment is so important. The first thing I'll tell you, and so many folk, whenever a company calls me in or a department of Duke or someone calls me in, I got to talk to the leadership first. Because if the leadership buys in, then everyone else will pay attention. and they'll hopefully understand and appreciate it. But you can't, if the leadership, I used to go years ago and you say, well, work with the staff and the leadership's not on board. People look up, so the leadership's not doing it. The leadership, they're not doing this, So again, it's so important. And the other thing is just simply and straightforward. Walk it like you talk it, okay? Be authentic. And if you say you're going to do something, the old ways. And then if for whatever reason you can't, as soon as possible, make people aware of that. Okay, one of the things, and then we'll just kind of open it up. I don't know if we'll actually take time for this. I don't know if you can see this. Can folks see this? You take a moment and read it. Okay, take a moment and read it. I've kind of alluded to it. I'm just going to take a couple minutes. And then as we kind of open up for questions and discussion and response. I'm going to take for granted, hopefully folks have had a chance, and I'll come right back. Let me throw this question out because I want to pause and give you a chance to respond in one way or the other. It says, what did the interviewer do or say that potentially influenced the behavior of the interviewees? And the second question says, what behaviors are possible subtle biases or unconscious biases do you believe were present that potentially impacted the interviewer's decision? And I'll just highlight a couple of things. I'm going to go back to it. Is that one of the things when we saw the interviewer, what did he say or do? He tried to comfort the male, the guy, and it was, the guy went on to have a fairly good interview. The young lady came, and the interviewer was distracted and everything else. And, how do you think she felt? She was not comforted. Do you think any of this might have been born out of implicit bias? And I'm going to pause right there and let people respond, or again, read.
We have a few comments. It sounds like Suzanne didn't get a fair shot. He showed empathy to John and paused and reassured him and let him restart with higher familiarity. Many times you hire what you know. It sounds like this is what has happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any others?
There are a couple questions.
Please.
What is the best dialogue suggestion when the reason someone isn't hired is because they won't fit or didn't look the part? How do you get hiring managers excited about diversity?
Yeah, I have a real issue with this, the right fit, okay? Because when you start talking about the right fit, that really opens up that opportunity for biases and stereotypes, to creep in. And so when we think about that, we really want to examine the credentials and qualification of each respective interviewee. I've got a colleague up, I think he's up at out of state now, and he talks about kind of when you go through the list of folks and you've looked at everything, before you respond back for who's coming in for an interview, et cetera, you may want to pause and review it again and really think about, am I hiring this person because they have this particular quality, but does it really fit the job itself? I mean, or I don't want to use that term fit, but does it really make them, a better candidate over another candidate? So as I said, the main point is, I think, is being very thoughtful and careful and not allowing, our stereotypes, because I know what this best fit thing comes in. I've already decided what it looks like, and it looks like somebody that I've worked with for the last 10 years. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best fit. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on. It's another question.
Yeah, I think the other one is the interviewed might be a conscious or unconscious gender bias, male versus female. And I think one of the items that was pointed out too is that the interviewer's gender is not disclosed. So a few of the comments have identified the interviewer as he, but it might as well could have been a she.
Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then it says, I agree, employers can get away with a lot of those words, the right fit. And the interviewer related to John due to similarities due to themselves, so they assumed they were just like them.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things, let me say, you know, we just mentioned and talked about implicit bias. Let me tell you, you know, one of the things I began with, I had to examine myself and how I, you know, introspection, and you got to keep doing it. You can't just do it one time. But I always ask myself, how am I showing up, okay? And I think I was sharing with you and Sarah and Amy the other day. I said, well, I'm showing up wonderful. Until my wife told me one day, asked me, said, what color is the sky in your world, you know? And so what I'm saying is that simply because you have this perception or idea, so that's why it's so important for that self-examination. Another criteria I think I shared with you all on the other day, I said, is that how do people respond to me? And I'm not just giving spousal jokes, but as my wife would say, well, if I'm not the only one making that observation, maybe that's something you really want to evaluate about yourself. The last thing I want to mention, and I'd be remiss not, the IAT, which stands for the Implicit Association Test. The Implicit Association Test and Project Implicit can be at Harvard. You can just Google Implicit Association Test or list IAT. This is a test, some may be familiar with it, takes about 20 minutes, half hour, but it examines our, you know, unconscious biases. You can take it on race, gender, age, any, you know, any number. You can take it on Harry Potter movies that you want. But what we find is that so many times that oftentimes what we think we're doing, we're not doing. You know, for example, you know, 70% of people who take the test say they have a preference for white. Even 30% of blacks will say a preference for white, but of course there's a cultural orientation to that. If you ask someone, oh, do you think women should be fair and, you know, I mean, we should treat women fair and equitable? Of course you should. But that same person might be saying, well, she needs to be home cooking, you know, and at the stove. You know. But I'm saying sometimes, you know, our conscious minds say, yeah, we're doing this or whatever, but our unconscious minds still have those vestiges of discrimination. If you ask about the elderly, of course I want to take care of the elderly, et cetera, et cetera. But oftentimes, taking this test, it may reveal those biases that may exist. So examining oneself, how people respond, and certainly the implicit association test are ways in which you can explore and examine how we're showing up. Anything else? I think we're right at time, so.
Bob,
Yes.
Thank you so much. What a great presentation. Do you want to forward a couple slides ahead to the end? There are some resources that Rita is going to describe. Let's see all the way.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Slide. There you go. Thank you.
So as Sarah mentioned, thank you so much, Dr. Crouch, for a wonderful presentation. The presentation will be recorded and posted onto the website. I hope everyone in attendance gained some new insights, and we invite you to join our next D&I webinar, Forging a Path to Becoming a Diverse, Equitable, and Inclusive Organization. This webinar will take place on August 19th.
Okay. And one more slide.
One more slide.
Oh, sorry.
And we also are proud to present 2 additional diversity and inclusion opportunities. The Alex Jackie Diversity and Inclusion Scholarship is accepting applications. The deadline is Friday, July 31st. We're also accepting applications for the Innovation and Diversity and Inclusion Grant. The deadline is August 31st. If you would like to learn more information about both of these opportunities, please visit the National Apartment Association website, where you can find those resources. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.